Welcome you all to Committee of the Whole. We have two main agenda items. The first is accessory dwelling unit registration revisions and considerations. And we will hear from, need everyone's attention, please. Thank you so much. We've got to get the meeting underway. So I'll say it again, accessory dwelling unit regulation revisions and considerations, and we'll hear from our planning staff to start.
Members of the council, you asked us at the conclusion of the public hearing to return to you to do a brief presentation to clarify any issues that were raised and identify our responses to a number of points that were open. We've got a very short presentation for you, and I'll turn it over to Chris, who will facilitate that.
All right. Good afternoon, council members. I'm going to quickly go over the review process for accessory dwelling unit applications. We had a number of questions about that. Then I'll cover a number of the key recommended changes. First, the process. The city has a number of process types. For example, for something that's permitted outright, such as building a single-family home or a detached garage, something like that. That's a type 1 process. It just takes a building permit. Doesn't require notification of adjacent neighbors or anything like that. An accessory dwelling unit permit requires a type 2 process. That's the current process that's required. That's not proposed to be changed. With that, it requires a notice of application with the project description to be mailed out to all owners of property within 500 feet of the project. Requires notification of Mayor's Neighborhood Advisory Committee representative, also the Neighborhood Association representative for that neighborhood where the project is located. It's also required to be sent to the representatives of any other neighborhoods that might be within 500 feet of the project. The notice of application is posted on site at the street. It's on one of those big yellow signs that you often see in the city. And there is a 14-day comment period. And so staff, when we receive comments, we take those comments into consideration when we review the application. As far as the key recommended changes, first one is to allow detached accessory dwelling units in single-family zones citywide. I want to point out that two cities, Seattle and Portland, that have very progressive accessory dwelling unit regulations. Throughout Seattle, only 1% of all households has an accessory dwelling unit. In Portland, another city, again, that has very progressive regulations, they don't require owner occupancy of accessory dwelling units, and just over 0.8% of all households in Portland, Oregon, have accessory dwelling units. Currently, Bellingham has 0.7% of all our households having an accessory dwelling unit. Some other recommended changes. First is to reduce the minimum lot size for detached ADUs from greater than 10,000 square feet down to 5,000 square feet. Again, there's 3 criteria. Either the lot must be on at least 2 streets, so like a corner lot, or it must abut an alley, or the lot must be greater than 10,000 square feet. If you meet one of those criteria, you can have a detached accessory dwelling unit. The only thing that's proposed to be changed is the lot size. It would reduce the height limit for detached ADUs from 25 feet to 20 feet. It would also eliminate an additional provision that would further limit a DADU, the height to that of the primary residence. So if the existing home is 1 story, the detached accessory dwelling unit couldn't be more than 1 story. Actually, as long as it's not the height of the home, because you can build a loft within an attic space. Another change would increase the maximum ADU size from 40%, which is the current standard, to 66% of the size of the primary residence, with an 800 square foot maximum. It It would allow a reduced setback for detached accessory dwelling units from property lines in the rear 32 feet of a property if criteria are met. So currently it's a 5-foot setback. It could be reduced to 0 feet, again, if the criteria are met. It would limit the number of bedrooms in an accessory dwelling up to 2. It would change the maximum number of occupants from 3 to 4 persons for an accessory dwelling unit. The reason for this is the current standard is 3 persons. It was brought up many times that what if it's a family with a child and they accidentally have another one come along, or intentionally have another one come along? What do we do? So this is intended to accommodate that situation. Another option was to just limit it to the definition of family, but the feeling there was that the definition of family is problematic, and so we felt this was simpler. Another change would require a minimum of 1 off-street parking space for each accessory dwelling unit, and then allow that to be reduced administratively if criteria are met. We would also allow administrative minor modifications to ADU regulations, again, if criteria are met, and it would place a review threshold on this ordinance. It would require review of the ordinance when 200 new detached accessory dwelling unit permits are issued citywide, or 25 in any one neighborhood, or by the year 2025, whichever occurs first. Another change would be to eliminate the 10-foot garage door setback requirement for detached accessory buildings from public alleys. No matter what, you need to provide 22 feet of maneuvering behind a parking stall, and you can use an alley for that maneuvering. And alleys in the city are anywhere from 12 feet to 20 feet wide. So depending on the width of the alley, you would only have to set back the garage door as necessary to provide that 22 feet. Another Planning Commission recommendation would be to eliminate impact fees for all accessory dwelling units. Currently, they're right around $4,000, and it would eliminate that. All other permit fees would be required, and those permit fees have been averaging total with impact fees between $10,000 and $13,000. And those are just the fees, not the cost of construction. And that is it. I'd like to turn it over to Rick for any final comments.
Yeah, if I might, just to provide clarification on the impact fees, there's nothing before you to amend that. That's a separate process. It was just a recommendation that was included by the Planning Commission. That's a separate process, would have to be considered independently because of the fiduciary responsibility of the council and noticed accordingly. I would say that we are happy to respond to questions now or after your discussion or during your discussion, and we're happy to prepare research in response to your direction to support your decision making on this topic.
Councilmember Hammond.
I just wanted to clarify, thanks for the presentation. Page 5, you talked about some this minimum lot requirement going from above 10,000 to 5,000 unless the subject property is on a corner or abutting an alley. Was there another criteria? Did I miss that?
There's 3 criteria: that the lot either has to be on more than one street, such as a corner lot, or it's on an alley, or it's greater than 10,000 square feet. That is the current criteria.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Borneman, please.
Yeah. With that criteria, doesn't that eliminate a whole lot of the new developments? It definitely brings in all of the old neighborhoods that have alleys and stuff, but a lot of the newer developments that are already many protected by covenants also don't have alleys behind them. They're built on cul-de-sacs, built on other things, and if they're not over 10,000 square feet, it eliminates those, right?
No, it does not. Again, you only have to meet one of those criteria. If you're on an alley, you can be under 10,000 square feet.
Well,
if you're on a corner lot, you can be under 10,000
right.
square feet.
So maybe one on a cul-de-sac might be, is they're only on one street and there's no alleys behind them.
Right, but I would say that.
So which one would they meet?
Well, if it's reduced to 5,000 square feet, then those lots, typically new subdivisions, the lots are at least 5,000 square feet, unless you're doing something like the infill toolkit, where you're creating smaller lots.
And there are going to be circumstances, this is not applicable to all properties in the city. Some properties won't work for these formulas, the way they're configured. Critical areas, other issues would prohibit further development.
Okay, Councilmember Knutson, please.
Yes, Rick, I have a process question. Didn't we docket the Happy Valley pilot project, what was it, 2 years ago or a year ago? Greg, do you remember? When we sent the pilot project to the Planning Commission for full review? Or was that was part of the ADU?
It was part of the ADU ordinance update.
Yes, when we sent that to the Planning Commission.
That was in 15 when we originally started the process.
Started the process. So it took from 2015 to where we are now.
Yeah, we did pause for a while we completed the comp plan.
Okay, I bring that up because the problem I have with the citywide situation, when we sent this, or when it was sent to the Planning Commission, there was no mention of citywide. So for me, this whole issue I have is process. I really like a lot of the stuff that's in here, and I don't have a problem with other neighborhoods looking at it, but that's the key word, look at it, just so everybody has the proper way to look at it, the way Happy Valley did all the heavy lifting and all the work they did. I'd like to see the other neighborhoods take a look at it also. So I'm just going to get that out of the way now.
I'm going to take Councilmember Lillquist, please.
Well, I'm a longtime supporter of ADUs. I know that they are a common and typical and historic format of development. And I'd like to see the rules change so we can allow more of them. That said, I'm a bit with Gene. I really thought last September we were going to have the pilot project approved, and I expected to approve the pilot project last November. That didn't happen. I would kind of like to return to the pilot project, at least in saying, how are the current rules as they're being brought forward different from the pilot project? Other than the citywide aspect, have the rules been tweaked or adjusted from the pilot project to the current recommendation in terms of all the height limits? And I think so. I think it's the height limits, the occupancy. What else has changed by the PC compared to the pilot project?
Other changes was the accessory dwelling units could be up to 90% of the size of the primary residence. The ADU with a detached garage could be up to 1,000 square feet, as long as you didn't exceed 90% of the size of the primary residence. Part of that was the intent to consolidate buildings on site, because you can build multiple detached buildings on site. Another change was it did not require design standards if the project was going to be under 15 feet in height. Those are probably the three main changes.
Councilmember Barker, and then I'll get Councilmember Borneman.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have a list of questions that I don't expect to be answered today, but I thought it would be helpful in that we're still waiting on public comment. So if maybe the public wanted to comment on the questions that I had, of course, it'd be inappropriate for us to make a decision at this point since we're still waiting to hear from public even more. I can run through maybe a couple of them now, allow some more people to speak, and then come back. One of them is with the parking. I would like, if possible, to consult with Natural Resources and review the climate action plan to see, maybe even debate the impermeable surface requirement versus increased open space requirement. And then potentially WTA as well. They have a new modeling procedure to see if the research may show that building less for the car may increase transit use. So I'd just like to weigh those along with that. As far as the height, I'm still a little confused as to why you could currently build up to 25, but you would build down to 20. And the main concerns I've heard from the public are that it's going to reduce design, and it may actually create more issues in design. So I would just like to learn more about that. The condominium restriction, I totally understand. However, with mission-driven organizations like KCLT, separate electric and water may allow condominiumizing that could increase property for permanent affordable housing and homeownership. So if it is a mission-driven organization that's willing to pay broader impact fees that could place another home, I think they have 180 now, potentially, I think that aligns with what the goals I'm hearing from the community, that they want to see more home ownership. So I just want us to consider it, and I'd like to know more about what the impacts would be. I'll leave with number 4, and I have 10 total for now. Occupancy requirement. I think the same issue that you're talking about could happen with a family of 4. I mean, things are unplanned. Family members get incarcerated and you need to take on their child. There's all kinds of reasons why quickly a family could go from 4 to 5. I understand having an occupancy. It's not my favorite, but I understand it. I would suggest we might talk about 4 adults, because our children are very important to us and we can't always predict whose children we're going to be raising and what those situations are going to look like. And I'll leave it at that for now, and then I'll come back to my other ones.
Well, I would also say that we could also get the questions to staff and have staff respond and send it to the committee. I think
Yeah.
that would be a cleaner way of doing it, since this isn't going to be a final decision, it sounds like, that we're making today.
Absolutely.
Would that be workable?
I know people have been asking me, like, what are my questions? So I thought if I did present them here very quickly, that if people did want to comment on them, give me more information, it would be helpful, versus just giving them to staff.
Your choice. Councilmember Borneman.
Yeah, in the whereases and in the question thing, staff states talks about the ADU focus group that was put together. Did that focus group focus on detached ADUs? And if so, what was their responses from that? Because I don't think it's thrown out there as one of the things that the Planning Commission, but did they focus on citywide what the effects would be and the positives and that kind of stuff from that?
Yeah, and if I could, I'll respond to that question and then just do a quick refresh of the process that got us here from the focus group. The focus group was a number of people that were convened by the director. I convened that group. It represented broad points of view. I can't say there was consensus on just about any meeting, any issue, except where the meeting would be held, and even that was debated at time. During that discussion, largely the premise that we focused on was that we felt there needed to be a place in our community for accessory dwelling units. There were those who supported broad use of it, both attached and detached, and those who expressed significant concern on that. That focus group led us to the process. The process was, we have a community that has not come to complete conclusion but had strong opinions on this. And could we find a neighborhood that would work with us to get products on the ground? And then folks could see them and come to their own conclusions. We could see how they would work. So we spent some time, and concurrent with that, there was an ongoing discussion before this body as part of the comprehensive plan process, wondering whether we wanted to even ban accessory dwelling units that were not attached as part of a comprehensive plan policy. So we suspended that. We looked for a partner neighborhood after discussion with several and many presentations. Happy Valley stepped up and said we'd be interested in looking at that. So we worked with them, and their approach was to look at both attached and detached in circumstances. They wanted to put a lid on it to get some on the ground and see how it was, but they wanted to move forward because they saw that as a way to meet some housing need within their very diverse community. As that work progressed, it got to the Planning Commission. The staff recommendation, and I've stated before, was to solely for the Happy Valley pilot project. And some minor procedural revisions, mostly housekeeping based on us working on it for some number of years. The Planning Commission, after consideration of testimony, and there was extensive testimony on these issues, felt that the time was right, that these standards could be taken and expanded beyond that. So no, the ADU focus group did not address it. The Planning Commission, upon hearing public comment, felt that the time was ripe to expand it. I should note that ultimately staff, and we've made no secret of this, believes in a broader application of the ADUs. We know there's a way of making it work, and how broad within the community is the matter that's before you today.
Council? Anybody else other than Councilmember Warner? I'm trying to spread the wealth. Councilmember Vargas.
Rick, I'm wondering if you could explain for people, general public, how the covenants work, and whether that means that someone, once we put, if we were to put a citywide options for ADUs and DADUs, what that means to the cities that have the parts of the cities that have the covenant.
There are a number of ways that a property owner can encumber their land to limit uses. It could be anything from a use that's not desirable to a paint color to a view easement. Typically, a subdivision, when it's crafted, includes covenants, codes, and restrictions. These are internal to that use, and they supersede our authority. As long as they're not illegal, they don't do something that violates federal fair housing laws or prejudicial that way, they're enforceable. The city doesn't enforce them, they're privately enforced. To be fair, private property owners can certainly come to agreement. If a neighborhood wished to encumber itself, even a pre-platted neighborhood, nothing restricts them from doing that if property owners agree. Often you go to the neighbor below you if you have a view and buy a view easement. If folks want to get together in an established neighborhood and by mutual agreement agree not to allow use, they certainly can encumber their land that way. That being said, covenants are things that are run with the land. There has been a question raised whether we could show every property in Bellingham that has such a covenant. That's a Herculean task because they're not inventoried by subject. We have recordation that goes with the auditor's office, and there's no index that says what's recorded on all of those documents. To be fair, I think the real issue here is it unfair, that's what I've heard posed, for folks who are in newer subdivisions who prohibit this use compared to older areas? Well, the older areas can encumber their land too if they choose to. And folks make choices where they live. Some folks don't want to live in a place that regulates paint color or height or style of building. That's a choice they make. So I think this is a choice issue, and I think that other communities that face this issue have responded accordingly and felt that there was adequate flexibility to allow it to proceed.
I'll take a quick follow-up from Pinky, and then I'll take Councilmember Borneman, then Lillquist.
If I may, just a clarification. So if an area has a covenant, but the neighbors agree and to allow for DADUs, then they can choose to do that in their area.
Two things. If you're in an area that's protected by covenants, there's usually a process in those covenants, codes, and restrictions to amend them, and you can amend your code if you wish to eliminate that prohibition. And then privately, other members can get together and provide restrictions on their land if they want to allow, you can encumber your land to some degree, again, as long as it's not illegal. I don't think that's going to really happen, but it's a right people possess.
Councilmember Borneman, please.
Yeah. One of the comments that we'd heard during the hearing had to do with concerns about the use of ADUs for short-term rentals. The question staff had stated right now, it's not, they can't be used for that. If we pass this ordinance, can we put a clause in it that makes it illegal to use any ADUs for short-term rentals?
Already illegal in some.
If I might respond, council can, by action, limit uses. I would say that there is a draft ordinance that was heard by the Planning Commission on short-term rentals. It's coming forward, and detached ADUs are prohibited in that ordinance for being used for short-term rental. If someone says, well, if you, between now, should you take action in the next couple of weeks on this matter, and when that ordinance perfects, could someone do it? No, the answer is short-term rentals are not permitted, period, right now. So they can't be legally established other than our bed and breakfasts.
But that doesn't answer my question. Can it be put in this ordinance
Yes, sir.
that states
Yes, sir. I said to the
it
affirmative.
cannot be used that way? We don't have to
You
worry
can
about
certainly
that.
do that, sir.
You need 4 votes. Okay.
That's right.
Who else? Councilmember Lillquist, sorry.
But it'll show intent.
a little preamble to explain. I'm going to try to group a bunch of questions into one. I hope this isn't a discussion about are we for or against ADUs. I'd rather a discussion about where, when, and how do ADUs work, and where, when, and how do ADUs not work. And so what I've been saying is that I like to see rules that were context sensitive. That it may be one set of rules, but it applies differently based upon your lot, based upon your neighborhood, based upon a lot of considerations. Did the Planning Commission discuss some sorts of context-sensitive rules that meant that the rules were different, say, if you had a larger lot versus a smaller lot in terms of this, not just in terms of the size of the ADU, but, for example, on-site parking might be different on a large lot than on a small lot. Height limits might be different on a small lot than a large lot. Setbacks might be different on a large lot versus a small lot. Did the Planning Commission discuss any tiering or any context sensitivity in that regard?
I can answer that. So basically what the Planning Commission looked at quite a bit is what is currently allowed on a single-family lot. You can build a detached accessory building up to 800 square feet, up to the property line in the rear 32 feet, no design standards, no owner occupancy required. You can build multiple detached accessory buildings up to 800 square feet as long as you maintain 30% open space on your property. Those buildings can be quite tall. There's a limit that says they shall be no more than 12 feet in height or 1 story. So if it's just 1 story and you're building to put in your motorhome, it can be a very large, very tall building. If you're going to put a barn on your property with just a hayloft, that is 1 story. It can go even larger. So looking at it in that context and how they crafted these, and also looking at what's currently allowed for attached accessory dwelling units, you can do an addition to a single-family home up to 800 square feet if the home is large enough. So what is the difference between an addition to a single-family home and separating it by a couple of feet? It gives more flexibility. It may preserve a historic home. Instead of converting space within a historic home, you're allowing a detached building. You may have significant vegetation right next to the house that you want to preserve, a large tree. So a detached ADU might be a better option. So it's looking at it in that context, what can be done currently, both with detached accessory buildings and attached accessory dwelling units, and trying to create similarity in the code, consistency in the code.
I guess I would just observe that using a barn as your yardstick may not be the best approach.
Councilmember Barker, please.
Okay. I think that brings a really good point, and I think if we frame it in a question, then staff can bring us back more information. And there has been some confusion in the community that this is kind of an all-or-one approach. And I think there are some variable opportunities, and that would be a great thing for staff to bring back so that we can see what the whole list of things that could be done, that it's not an all or one, and we as council get to make that decision. I have a few more things I wanted to make sure that do come back, or if the community wanted to respond. Make available, if you haven't already, the public record, the Department of Commerce research that was brought to our town hall meeting, because there's been a lot of question about affordability, and in no uncertain terms, they have it on their website. They've shown research that anytime you put another unit, you are impacting housing affordability, and I think that would be really great for people to understand the Department of Commerce information on, even if it's not an affordable unit, how that can impact. I'd like to see other areas, multifamily zone currently, but they really are masked as single family because they're mostly single family homes in those multifamily areas. I think Sunnyland and the area around BTC are 2 examples because the infill toolkit and detached ADUs have been allowed, but from my view, I don't see many of them have been built. So I'd like to look at those areas and understand it's been available for 10 years. Did a lot get built? Did a few get built? What happened there? I think that would give us some really good context that would bring us back to fact. There's The utility, I'm fine and supportive if we move forward with this to have utility at the same. But I do remember some subsidy conversations around specific subsidies that need to have like separate electric. And I don't know if that's still the case, but I would just want to make sure within our subsidy providers that we're not removing or putting barriers to people with affordable housing that might need something like a separate utility bill. The community concern approach on the bedroom minimum, I also understand. However, there are designs that show adequate space of 800 square feet with 3 bedrooms. I wondered if we might consider water fixtures versus bedrooms so that people could do what they need. And this comes back to the subsidy, because if you're on some subsidies and you're a single father with children of different genders, at a certain age, they have to be in separate bedrooms. And so, again, we might be limiting by deciding, oh, only 2 bedrooms will make it smaller or less people. I just want to make sure as we move forward and we make these decisions that we've thought ahead of that. And looking at water fixtures could decrease all kinds of things as far as the environment is concerned if you only can have 1 bathroom per se. I think with that, those were all of mine, except for reviewing the city of Ferndale. They did have owner occupancy, which we put in the comp plan, and I can support. But they also put a provision, if I remember right, of next of kin. So if there's if somebody's switched, I think we had an example here in the city where an elderly gentleman had built an attached ADU, was failing, was having some help, and then because of what their lawyer told him to do, he moved the house into his daughter's name. And as soon as that happened, the neighbor complained, and the city was in a really awkward situation of saying, you need to remove your father or you need to take occupancy. So I just want to make sure we're not creating situations like that that in the future will be like, should have thought of it. So those are my questions.
Great, thank you. Council, anything further? Okay, Councilmember Vargas.
I just wanted to speak to the comment that you made, Jean, and I understand how people feel about this, but when we went through the 2016 comprehensive plan, one of the things we asked for is to look for all options to be on the table, to look at every resource to find ways to solve our housing crisis. ADUs and DADUs are not a panacea. We don't think that this is going to solve everything, nor do we think that there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of them. But I do want to commend the Planning Commission for actually asking for a broader application and for being nimble and looking at the crisis we have and looking at options. So I don't think that this has been any kind of crisis in government. I think that this is actually the Planning Commission doing what they were supposed to do, is to look at the situation at hand and to give us options that can work for the city. So I just want to stand behind the Planning Commission and that process.
Just briefly, I understand that. I've always had a lot of respect for the Planning Commission. Greg can vouch for that. I bet I can count 5 times in 25 years I've ever disagreed with them. And this is a situation where you're asking every other neighborhood to go along with something that they had. Now, sure, they could have chimed in during the whole process. Happy Valley did all their hard work. All I'm saying is let the other neighborhoods do the same thing. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying anything wrong about the Planning Commission. I am a little concerned that the Planning Commission gets into a situation where they start sending stuff up to us and we're supposed to be sending it down to them. I do have a problem with that. We didn't ask for this. The staff didn't ask for this. They came up with it themselves and brought it back to us. I fully understand that. I'm having a hard time remembering when that was done last, when an issue was sent to them that was a pilot project of any kind, or one issue sent to them, and it became a citywide issue. That's the problem I have with that. Other than that, I've always stuck up for people that serve on the Planning Commission. It's a thankless job just like ours is. They don't get any monetary value out of it other than heartburn. I understand that. But what I'm saying is, I want every other neighborhood to have the same luxury that Happy Valley had, and all the citizens of Bellingham that live in those neighborhoods to have the say on their neighborhood. If Birchwood and Sunnyland and anybody else wants to come forward, bring them forward. Let's put them through the process right now. Let's go to work. Let's put 3 or 4 neighborhoods in at the same time, and let's follow what Happy Valley did. That, to me, is fair. I'm not saying anybody did anything wrong or anything. You know, it's just, you know, I walked in the room last Monday night, and the room was split right in half. I mean, I could see by looking at the room what has happened during this process. And it has pitted a lot of people versus, but that's over and done with. We're now in a decision-making process where the council's going to have to make a decision. And all I'm saying is the best possible solution is for us to put every other neighborhood through the same process that Happy Valley went through and truncate it as fast as we can.
Okay, I'm only going to take a couple more comments because we have to move on. I'll take Councilmember Lillquist and Borneman.
Thank you. I will save some other questions for later. Make one quick observation. We're receiving a lot of support across the neighborhoods. I think many neighborhoods will be also equally split with many supporters. It's not like this neighborhood's for and this neighborhood's against. I think there's community members across the spectrum in all of the neighborhoods where for supporting and also against. I have a general question that has to do with, again, the Planning Commission's discussion. Was there some discussion on limiting the concentration or number of accessory dwelling units? I don't mean the review in 20 years or whatever if a number was reached. Some sort of, say, percentage limit that on any given street or any particular planning area, only a certain percentage of units could have ADUs and not. Because I think one of the things that was talked about historically is a few ADUs doesn't change the neighborhood. ADU in every lot does. Was there any discussion on, again, that has to do with kind of embedding ADUs in the context of the neighborhood to see when it does or doesn't have an impact? Was there a discussion on limiting in terms of percentages or numbers?
We did have discussions early on when we introduced the ADUs dealing with dispersion. Should there be a separation between units to avoid sort of all of them being dense packed in one area should that occur? So that was discussed. What I would do is I'll ask Chris if he wants to further that discussion, how that.
Sure. So that was part of the opportunities and concerns matrix. There's a whole section on dispersion and what are the opportunities and concerns. What came out of that is the city has various block sizes. There's not a lot of commonality. So where other cities do it by block, other cities do it by distance. There's other issues that we have with regards to, we have a number in our older neighborhoods, number of duplexes, triplexes, eightplexes. So if you have a limit of how many within a block and yet you have an eightplex on the block, where's the fairness? Dispersion is very complex, and in the end, it really doesn't work out really well, is the finding.
Councilmember Borneman, please.
Yeah. One of the reasons I'd heard from the Planning Commission that they wanted to, let's do it citywide, is because they don't want to hear each neighborhood. They don't want each one coming back and doing that work. But I really feel, I hope in our next meeting, we can discuss the idea that all neighborhoods are not created equal and are not all suitable the same as other neighborhoods for where what can be accommodated. We were having great discussions. I know it was with Rick and with the mayor, and he was with the ADU task force prior, looking at what possibilities, where things might fit. I agree with Michael in that I'm not against DADUs. It's where will they fit and where won't they fit, and some areas are much better. And what will it do to the specific neighborhoods? I would like to look at eliminating some based on small lots and density. And people wonder why I get a little up in the air about this, but my ward, as Chris State was quoted in the Herald, my ward is the one that's impacted the most. Seaholm, York, South Hill, parts of Happy Valley. These neighborhoods, if you look at last week at the hearing, I had staff make copies of a number of different maps for the cities. If you look at the densities of the neighborhoods in York and Seaholm, we're at 5.3, 5.2 compared to 3 points for most of the others. We're already the densest neighborhoods in the city with the most types of housing forms of any neighborhoods in the city. If you look at the amount of rentals in our single-family neighborhood, York has 46% of their single-family neighborhoods are in rentals already. They're feeling really pushed on here of what's happening to their neighborhood. Seahome, 41% of our small single-family neighborhood is currently in rentals. And when the neighbors hear, oh, this will only add a little, this is one, they see that as one more bullet against them in terms of taking away what was their neighborhoods. They're turning into just rentals in it, and this just pushes it farther. So I would like for us to be able to have a discussion, to look at where they are appropriate, where we can agree on. Because, you know, South neighborhood, wonderful. They've got 20,000 square foot lots, not very dense. Some of the Samish, 20,000 square foot lots. They probably got covenants, though, that protect them. But some of them, you know, look at that as maybe more appropriate. When you've got certain neighborhoods with big lots and other stuff, let's look at those where we can do it and agree on. But trying to force this down everybody's throat, yeah, you know, I hope we can have that discussion.
Okay, I'm going to close this session, and I wanted to announce that we will be closing the written public comment regarding accessory dwelling units. We've kept that open after the public hearing, so we will be closing the written comment for the public hearing on April 27th at 5 p.m. And I'll be sure to announce that during our evening meeting also to get the word out to our community. But again, that's closing the written comment for the public hearing regarding accessory dwelling units on Friday, the 27th at 5 p.m. Okay, so moving on to our second agenda item, that is Lummi Nation water contract negotiations update. And we'll get to hear from Ted Carlson.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. At your last council meeting, the council asked that staff come back and provide an update of where the administration was on the water negotiations with the Lummi tribe for their property near the Slater Road I-5 interchange. In your packet, there's a memo that provides a little bit of background that brings us up to where we are today. And I'll go through that briefly, and certainly we're happy to answer any questions that council may have. The last time I was before council, I presented 3 potential options in terms of what a contract and the terms of the contract may look like for extending water service to the trust land. And 2 of those options council felt were worth pursuing. One option was business as usual, which is the way we contract. We have 8 contracts for wholesale water service. That's what we call the business as usual contract. All of those contracts have the same term, which is we charge them the retail water rate plus the out-of-city multiplier, and that does include an 11.5% utility tax. That's the business as usual model. The second model we presented was to try to create a wholesale water rate. The city doesn't currently have a wholesale water rate, but a wholesale water rate presumably would be lower than the retail rate because we wouldn't be providing all the direct administrative services, billing, customer service, things of that nature. So you would have a lower wholesale rate. And as I presented to council at that time, one requirement of that would be that we had a better understanding of how much water the Lummi Nation would take under this contract. And the idea behind that is that any contract for service, the city needs to be assured that enough revenue is captured to help pay for the proportionate share of the infrastructure to deliver the water to the contractor or the contract. So that we would need some information about the amount of water, volume, things of that nature. So that we call that the wholesale water model, and that would include using the utility tax, the current 11.5% utility tax, perhaps changing that rate a little bit, maybe raising it to try to generate more revenue to the general fund as a way to offset some of the potential impacts that had been talked about previously that may happen with development at the Slater Road site. The third option, which council pretty quickly dismissed as not one that you were in favor of, was a model that was similar to how we deal water to the port at their airport property under an interlocal agreement. And under that agreement, we charge some development-specific fees similar to what we would do if the property were in the city limits, something that looks somewhat like a development impact fee. And that was not something that council wanted us to pursue. So we had pretty good discussion about the two viable options, the business as usual and the wholesale rate, and council gave some direction to the administration to continue negotiations with the Lummi tribe with the intent of bringing back to council in the future a contract for your approval. I had presented those two options to the Lummi tribe team, actually all three options previous to coming to council, and I got some feedback from them as well. And as we kind of went through the previous negotiations, the city team and the Lummi team, one of the things that I believe I heard was that there wasn't a real desire on the Lummi Nation side to commit to a certain amount of water. I mean, they were going to need the water they needed over time as the property developed, and certainly we talked about a maximum water amount of the 300,000 to 600,000 gallons a day. But the other side of that equation, the guaranteed commitment of a minimum amount of water that would help us understand how we could develop a wholesale water rate was not something that, at least initially, there was a lot of support for on the Lummi team side. And one thing we talked about is perhaps we could also work with the current contract the city serves, as council is aware, the reservation through a wholesale contract. And maybe we could look at the two sites and through a lower wholesale contract rate, come up with a minimum amount of water that the city would sell that would guarantee us the revenue to support the infrastructure repair and replacement. So we had some discussion about that. As I mentioned, I don't believe that was something that, at least on our side, we believe that was interest in that. We hadn't received the information that we needed to develop the wholesale rate. So after discussions with council, we put together a draft contract, which was a business as usual contract, which certainly was within the scope of what we discussed, and sent it to the Lummi Nation back on October of last year, 2017. Certainly thinking that that would be the first part of the negotiation. It was a draft contract, and we expected to hear back, and maybe some of the terms were unacceptable, and we could perhaps have further discussions about those. And then hadn't received any feedback until the letter that was received by the mayor a few weeks ago, and I think that's what prompted the question from Councilmember Barker to come back and give an update that the letter from the chairman indicated that the terms of the contract were not acceptable to the Lummi Nation and that the city should reconsider the terms of the contract. So we're here before the council today. I think there were a few other items in the draft contract that certainly, based on what we could see from the chairman's letter, were unacceptable, and probably the one that also stood out in addition to the rate was the condition of annexation and not protesting annexation. And we talked quite a bit about that with council the last time we spoke about this issue. That is standard language in any city contract. We talked a little bit about what that might actually mean, because we're talking about trust land. This does not have the same implications as a city annexing unincorporated county land, where it would become a part of the city and subject to all the city's land use regulations and the city's authority across the board. Really what this annexation amounted to is a mechanism for the local portion of the sales tax that would be charged on Lummi Nation land that would be paid by non-tribal members. The local portion of that sales tax would then come to the city if annexed, rather than going to the county. And well, I do want to clarify, in the memo in your packet, there was a statement that the tax burden would not change to the folks doing business on the trust land, the non-tribal folks, and that is not accurate. I do want to clarify that. That was my error. The sales tax charged by the city is slightly higher than the sales tax in unincorporated Whatcom County. Because of the TBD. There's an additional 0.2% that the city charges for sales tax. So there would be a slightly higher local tax burden if annexed than when operating in unincorporated Whatcom County. So I do want to make that clarification. I apologize for that. But that was the purpose, and really going back a few meetings prior to that where we talked about the initial question of whether or not it was in the city's best interest to serve the trust land, using the BMC as our guide for that, saying that to extend utilities outside the city limits, even through a wholesale contract, the council needed to determine that it was in the city's best interest to do so. And one of the things we talked about was the potential economic impacts of that and a strategy for annexation, in addition to be a requirement of our code that we require annexation on the provisions of urban utilities. The other side of that was the ability to bring in some revenue to the city through that local portion of the sales tax. Clearly, that was not, based on the chairman's letter, acceptable to the Lummi Nation. So at this point, as is mentioned in the memo before the city council in your packet, the administration is certainly willing to continue to have discussions about this, and we may mistakenly assumed that we were going to have further discussions, and that our draft contract was just that, a draft contract to get the process moving forward. So with that, happy to answer any questions on how we got to where we're at or what staff believes the next steps are. The mayor may have something she would like to say.
Mayor Kelly, please.
Thank you. The thing is, we're already a little bit outside of business as usual with this contract, but if the idea was we wouldn't increase the cost to the nation for what they're paying now, they don't have to pay the TBD. We could say it could be less. I mean, what we thought would be, we would get something back that said, you know, this isn't acceptable, we'd like to do this. This isn't acceptable, we'd like to do that. So what we need, what I believe that we need direction up from the council is, do we really have a negotiation, which I think would be difficult, but maybe we could, or do we just keep basically trying to respond to and guess what the main, you know, what they would like? Because it would be very helpful to have them let us know what would be acceptable to them, so we'd know if we were negotiating, or if you give us direction and just say, I don't think that that's going to work, we'd just like you to write the contract for them. Because we obviously can do that. I would have to say personally that in the best interest of the city would mean that we were doing something more equitable, but it really doesn't matter. It's whatever you guys want to do. But this direction you previously gave us, we tried to comply and we were unable to. So I want you to understand that we did try.
I have a really quick question to start. So at the end of the last meeting that you had with the nation, was it made clear that a draft contract was going to be sent?
That was made clear in an email exchange that, well, we'll just send a draft contract to start the process, continue the process. So it wasn't in a meeting, it was through an email exchange. We'll send a draft contract for your review.
Like with the chairman?
No, Richard Jefferson
Okay.
is on the, Richard Jefferson, Lisa McShane, and Chip Anderson are the team that I work with at the
I see
staff
what you're
level.
saying.
Yeah.
Because that could be a potential point of heartache, because that doesn't feel like a negotiation then. I understand that it was with the idea that it would continue to be negotiated, but that's not how it really works in Indian country. So that may have been an issue. I'll take other counsel.
I guess I'd like to clarify, Roxanne, before you go on, because that was the conversation that I had with Tim, where we actually talked person to person about this. So we were not talking necessarily through staff, we were talking person to person. And I contacted the new chairman to congratulate him when he was elected. And I'd be very happy to sit down and talk with him, but I have not been able to get a phone call. And I know he's really busy with his new job, but at that point in time, it seemed like the way our process works, staffs are working together. I'm happy to work with the new
Yeah,
chairman.
and I was going to bring that up too, that there was a leadership change and maybe that's a
Yes.
slowdown, but we have to take it at the pace of the tribe in addition to our administration here. Councilmember Lilquist, and then I'll take Vargas.
Thank you, Roxanne. Yeah, I guess I am perceiving there must be some degree of breakdown in communication, because I kind of thought we had the broad outlines of an agreement. I think the point behind the business as usual model, maybe it's a bad name, is that it put the discussions in the framework of a utility service request. And that was one of the things I think the council said is, this is a utility service request, let's treat it like a utility service request. And the discussion had to do with the fact that it's a wholesale utility request for a certain amount, what sort of rate adjustments would be fair, given the fact that it's coming at a bulk rate, then the usual retail rate doesn't make any sense, what rate does make sense. It seems to me like that's where we were going. So I don't know why we haven't gotten there. I think that's what I was hoping for. I think it's important also in terms of discussion to deal with this issue of annexation. As I'm hearing you, it's one of my questions here, you explain it, annexation as it applies to tribal trust land is almost invisible or non-existent. It exists on paper in many senses that matter to the city, but doesn't have any controlling influence over what happens on tribal property. I think that needs to be really clear, that annexation does not mean in any sense giving away any of the authority that the tribe has over its own trust lands. Maybe that's a misunderstanding there again. As I read the memo, we kind of have to use annexation if we're going to continue our annexations in the rest of the area. We can't create pockets of non-annexation or leapfrog. That's how I'm understanding it. So if this was any way going to be limiting tribal sovereignty, I could see why they'd object, but I'm hearing that it doesn't limit their sovereignty. So again, I'm not sure if there's a communication breakdown issue here or not.
Well, Michael, I think you're right. There's no way that we can dictate what happens on tribal land or trust land. And that was never, that wasn't an option or a requirement or a request. And if that was not clear, I'd be happy to make it clear, but we tried to make it clear in the letter that we're writing back to them about what we didn't mean. So I guess direction from the council is really important to me. Because right now, I feel like there's a desire to have something, and I mean, a desire to have an agreement, and tell us that's what you want, and we'll consider to continue to pursue it.
Councilmember Vargas.
I, for one, would like us to see if we can move forward with negotiations with them. I'm curious about something. Could we not, in a wholesale rate, look at the aggregate usage with what we sell them right now, and then do a tiered, like in my day job, we have rate schedules for how much usage people have, and then tier the cost with that? Does that make sense?
It most certainly does make sense, and we could. One of the challenges is we need some data. We need to not only understand what the current demand is, as well as what the potential demand could be with a lower rate. So the key to all of this, if we're going to provide a much lower wholesale rate, is that we understand that we're going to actually sell some water, so that we can be assured the revenue to support that infrastructure that's delivering the water. The challenge with the Slater Road site is we know it's going to take a long time to develop. Hopefully, everybody's successful, and it does at some point have the 300,000 to 600,000 gallon per day demand. The idea was perhaps we look at not just only the Slater Road site, but include the amount of water we could sell through our current contract on the reservation boundaries. But we sell very little water through that contract right now, and it's very, it's not consistent. Some years it's more than others. And so we were hoping to get some data that if we developed a rate that was lower enough, maybe there would be a desire to buy more water more consistently on the reservation that would have the benefit of assuring us the revenue we need, but also moving some water out there because we have the big pipes to support the ultimate demand. It would be great to sell some water. So we would like to have that conversation, but we need to have the data.
Okay, Councilmember Vargas has a follow-up, then I'll take Hamel and Knutson.
that makes me think, I realize that we have the same issue with our district energy. We don't have enough usage in order to, pay for the amount. Is there a way that maybe we could work with the Lummi Nation to maybe pay for the development of the access for the water lines, and then eventually, when they get to a certain usage, that our cost would sort of eventually equal to the amount of usage? If there was maybe an agreement, and I'm just throwing this out there as a crazy, but because I'm sure they are aware too that they don't know exactly what the future is going to look like for them. And maybe if there was a way that we could work together on the cost of putting in the facilities for the development, if that would be a way that could lessen the cost in the initial portion. Is that completely unrealistic, or?
I appreciate that you're thinking of different ways to make it work, and that's very helpful. The contract and the proposal that the city's has put forward, and we've been always operating under the assumption, is that the Lummi Nation would pay for the infrastructure to deliver all new pipes would be paid for by the Lummi Nation. So, but they get dedicated over to the city, and then the city's responsible for repair and replacement of not only this new infrastructure that was installed, but all the other infrastructure to get it out to the newly installed pipe. So the model, and it's the same with all customers, we need to be assured a certain amount of revenue so that we can reinvest in the system. Everybody's rate is based on that. It's based on not only the cost to deliver the water today, but also to replace the pipes, pumps, storage needed in the future.
So we were never intending on building the infrastructure. That is a responsibility of the person that's getting the water. It was the operation and upkeep that we take on as a city, and that's why it's important to know how much water they're going to be using, so that we know into the future. Ted knows how much, what the rate should be, so we can fix the pipes so they don't break. Or when they break, to fix them, yeah.
Councilmember Hamel.
So I just want to get clear on 2 points. So the annexation language is really, according to this memo, is really related to the collection of sales tax. Is that the main animating?
Yeah, I think there's
component?
two points. I think that's certainly one of them. The other one is the notion of the city's ability to annex the remaining areas in the UGA, and ensuring that we have contiguous boundaries and that there's not irregular boundaries, and that we can actually annex all of the remaining land in the UGA at some point without there being a section of land within the UGA that's not annexed, so that you in essence would have to leapfrog that property to annex the remaining UGA land. So those are the two issues. It's the revenue, for sure, on the local sales tax side, and then the contiguous land needed for full annexation of the UGA.
Isn't that a requirement?
Yeah.
Okay, and then just the second part of that question is, I think I heard you correctly, Mayor, when you said that we can take out the TBD, which is the 0.2%. Did I hear that correctly?
We can set whatever rate we want. What I'm saying is that if there's a concern on the part of the council that they would be paying more to us for something like TBD or something like that, then that's a negotiation to have with them about what it is. But the main point is, how much does it cost to maintain the pipes? So that's the main thing. We can figure out the rest of it. There's nothing in stone. Peter wants to say something.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, Peter Raffato, Legal Department. Along the lines of what Mayor Kelly is saying, I think once you're in negotiation, you can figure out ways to make adjustments, whether it would be an adjustment in the tax, or the tax may apply, but you could adjust things somewhere else. Again, these are the kind of things that would come out of a discussion about that, and I'm sure there are lots of things we could think of as part of that.
Councilmember Knudsen.
I think one of the things I'd like to see is a sit-down at a table between the mayor and the tribal chairman and both staffs, and go over all this. Because if my memory is correct, and Ted, you haven't been here as long as I have, but the water rate we set for Georgia Pacific way back in the middle 90s, late 90s. We had multiple public hearings on it. There was a lot. It was raw water, which we could do out here, is just send them raw water. The biggest problem back then was, well, you're using too much water. Well, we're only using about 9 or 10 million gallons a day. Isn't that correct?
Right now, yes.
And back then, we were using between 55 million and 70 million gallons a day. So
Correct.
when everybody gets upset that this really isn't a critical water usage problem, what is critical, and I think it can be done. I think if we can get the mayor and the tribal and both staffs together and sit down, it might take a while, it might take a lot. I sat in the Parks Department office for 8 hours with Byron Elmendorf and Jerry Walker, and they hammered out a baseball lease, which none of them I ever thought would happen, and it happened. So I would love to see both sides sit down and go over all of this. They're an existing customer. I hear people say we're breaking our rules by sending water out to something that's not in our UGA. They're a current water customer. They need to be treated like a current water customer. And I think if both staffs can sit down and look each other in the eye and go over all this stuff, hopefully something can happen.
Councilmember Barker.
Thank you. So I think many of us attended the Peace and Reconciliation event yesterday, and there's something there whenever we talk about city's best interests that I think we need to think of it very broadly. And one of the gentlemen came up and said, you know, all the money in the world can put up these plaques and do these things, but it's love that will eventually make a difference in our community. And I bring that up because we do tend to look at things as business as usual, and we might have set you up for failure sending you out there because this is not business as usual. We're dealing with a nation, we're living on a property of people that it was taken from. This is very different than dealing with Ferndale or a development company. And we saw the community's response to the Peace and Reconciliation, and I think oftentimes we forget, and we need to take it a little bit slower and be a lot more thoughtful. So I definitely want to see Lummi Nation prosper. I've seen other tribal nations be the backbone of their counties and their states. And I think that we have no idea if we were able to support in some way the things that we're creating barriers for, what the nation could possibly do that would impact huge and profoundly just by elevating their own people, but also being neighbors and us seeing that revenue and that spending economy. So I want to see us get water there. I know in the past, I don't want to convolute this, I want us to move forward personally. The annexation, I can see where there's confusion there because this is federal land. And it's one of the questions I brought up in our ADU annexation, that maybe we need to have that conversation about that Area 7, I think it was, in this, of removing it from the UGA, because we're to make assumptions on, it says on page 2 of the memo, that removal of these industrial lands from the city's future tax base make it less feasible to annex costly urban growth areas such as the Alderwood area. And I think that was one thing back in the day when it was going to be industrial lands, but now it's changed. It's now federal lands. And so for us to say we might not be able to annex Alderwood because we won't have this revenue, that makes it really difficult for me to move forward because Alderwood is a social justice issue, and I think we need to have that discussion separately. It shouldn't be dependent on Lummi lands. I think, again, not to confuse it further, but there's been conversations in the past about being a regional water authority. And it's never gone very far, but you bring up a great example. We were giving out 55 million gallons a day, and now we're down to 9 to 10. We know that we can give more water and not impact the lake. We also have things in the finance department that we're talking about. How do we create more revenue but less burden on the people? And one of those is, you know, Ferndale's been really struggling with finding water right now, so they're right out the same direction too. So I think we should move forward with Lummi. I don't think we should pose annexation. I think when we look at taxation, that creates, that might even come off, if I understand, that's at the state level. We might not even be able to take taxes on tribal lands, is my understanding.
Who they pass the state might change that requirement.
Yeah, so that just makes it move anyway at some point. But I think, yes, move forward with that, remove the annexation, don't treat it exactly like business as usual. This is an opportunity to partner with people who are really moving forward with self-sufficiency And I just think it's really crucial and important to all of us that the Lummi prosper. And this water is one opportunity. So with that, I would say that. And I think it might be an interesting conversation for this council to have in talking with some of the Ferndale City Council members and their uncertainty with water right now is if we're already going to be driving water out that direction, the revenue itself could decrease our constituents' water bills, and we could maybe even move faster on our Lake Whatcom goals as well as 100% renewable goals and other things. That revenue could go there. So I don't think we should totally take it off the table to think even beyond this. And it would reduce the cost for Lummi if they partnered with other people to bring water. So.
And I think it would be great if we could bring you a comprehensive look at the unintended consequences of all the things that you've just mentioned, April, because there are some. And the one thing is, it's both revenues, which if you want to give them away and we pay for it, that's fine, but it's contiguousy too. So you can't just take 7 out and then we can still annex, because the state says the properties have to be contiguous. That's the problem with just taking 7 out of the whole mix. So that would be something we'd have to figure out. I really want to annex Alderwood because I feel like they've been the stepchildren of our community for a very long time, and I want to help them. The second thing is examining our water right. Like, we are talking about the fact that we're only using this much water now, but we have this much water available. I always protected that at the state level so we could be a part of that solution, like a regional water authority, like managing our water on a watershed basis, that we would be able to use our water to help other people out in the community. Linden's requested water, Ferndale's requested water, the Lummi Nation has requested water. If we want to, of course, you jump in if I say something wrong, but if we want to provide water to other municipalities, then we potentially open our water right up for examination, which means we may not be in the position to necessarily help people. And so I'm happy to bring everything you said. I'm happy to bring forward an analysis of the things that you've asked for, and then you have all the information about the choices that you'd actually be making.
Okay, Vargas and then Borneman.
Did I say something wrong?
I support Councilmember Knutsen's suggestion for the two governments to work together and trying to find a negotiation. I also would like us to come to the table trying to figure out if there's ways that, obviously I don't want the city to lose money because we have our own budgets to be concerned of, but if there's a way that we can work with the Lummi Nation to figure out if there is a minimum where it's not costing us money in regards to the amount of usage that we're having. And if they don't meet a minimum, then maybe there's a cost until they get to that required. But I just want us to look at being a little bit more exploratory in how we can find solutions that help them prosper, but also help us prosper. And I think there's a way here, so just...
Councilmember Borneman, then Lillquist, then me.
Yeah, I also agree about trying to set up a negotiation. I realize, though, to negotiate, both parties have to respond to each other. Hopefully, after this, there will be response, and we can get both parties to the table. And the more chances of talking, because I do think it's in the tribe's best interest to sit down and negotiate, because they're the ones that need the water. It's not a matter of just, take it or leave. Well, that's what it could be, but it's not. It's to sit down and discuss those issues. So I think that's what we need to do. But in terms of, no, don't give up the idea about the annexation, because we know that's an important part of that whole package. We're not going to annex their land, but that area, that territory, still that part still needs to be there, because we do know the unintended consequences of the loss of that. So that's my...
Councilmember Lillquist?
I guess I would say we need to be cautious before we think that the revenue that we get from this will be any benefit to current users. If we charge so much money that there's a benefit to the current users, we're overcharging. I don't think we want to overcharge. I think the whole point behind any publicly run utility is cost recovery, no more, no less than necessary. So that's how I think we should approach it with a levy. This is what it'll cost to serve you. You pay that cost and no more. As a public entity, we're not out for profit, neither are we out for loss. I guess, that's how you're running a public utility.
And I would say that that is the approach we're taking, that we're looking at, we need to know how much repair or investment we need to make, and that would be all that we would be talking about. But I think there's three ways to do this. There's staff to staff, or there's chairman to mayor, which is, we tried that. And when there wasn't an agreement, then it was council members or staff to their council members or staff to our council members, which, basically took me out of the loop. They didn't need to talk. They didn't need to talk to me. And that's okay too. You should negotiate with who you want to negotiate with. So we've tried staff to staff. It could be council to council. So you work with the council out there, or it could be Jay and I sitting down and talking. I would prefer the last one to start with. So that would be where I would look to, because I think the staff has done a lot of their work already. They've got the technical things down. They know what the options would be and how much they would cost. So that's what I would like to do, but I'm very willing to take direction from the council about what you think, because obviously there's a desire to do this, and in order to do it, then we have to be successful. Just so everybody knows, I have a long history of working with the Lummi Nation. And it's like working with the jail. There's one issue that kind of gets people going. Well, I've worked on fishing issues and all different kinds of issues, cultural issues, everything with the Lummi Nation for the last 25 years. But water is a separate issue. And the same, so it's not that there is not a relationship there. There is a relationship there. But this is a very difficult issue if you want to not have unintended consequences. That's all.
Okay, I take a little bit of different take on it. I'm tired of us talking about the way we do business. I'd like to do business the way the Lummi Nation wants to negotiate this. And that might take a while. Might take a lot of sessions. Might take a lot of work. But that's good work to do. Mm-hmm. The thing that I'm the most concerned about right now, sitting here, trying to take a bigger picture perspective on it, is the relationship. And the relationship is what we need to have. Sure, there are many other ways we can have relations with the Lummi Nation, but this is the one that's before us. I'm really concerned that, the city, generally speaking, and I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, has scrutinized the kinds of developments that may occur on that property. And then we're saying out the other side of our mouth, we want the taxes from that property, whatever the development might be. That's not relationship building nature to me, and we might not be putting those ideas together. I just want to bring that forward as a consideration that I have. Because I think it's really important that we treat this respectfully, not with the common standard business practices, because tribes have a different way of doing things. The Lummi Nation has a different way of doing things, and their whole tribe has a vote on some things that come before their council. So it's sometimes not as easy as just talking to the chairman to get something done. We really do things in consult with our elders, with our youth having a say, because we have youth councils. So it's just a broader way of doing business that I think we could learn from in many respects. So that relationship is so important to me, and I hope it's one that we can have through thoughtful negotiations going forward.
Well, I'm very willing to do it obviously as the mayor. I had a sense from some of the members on council that this was something that needed to be done quickly. And I know I spent 4 years with Tim, so I know this is not something that gets to be done quickly. But I felt like all of a sudden it was. And that's why we looked at staff working together and something that would, get something in front of you so you could adopt it. If this is relationship building and not running immediately out to do something because we need to right now, I'm much more comfortable with that.
Yeah, and I'll just say as a joke, but with some seriousness too, we don't generally have a lot of trust from documents that come in from the external world. So we got to be careful about that. Councilmember Knudsen.
Yeah, I'm going to move that we send the mayor into negotiations with the Lummi Nation, whatever way that is, one-on-one, you and your staff. That might be vague. Why don't I just say have the mayor go into negotiations for water with her appropriate staff?
Well, I feel like that's what's been happening.
We don't have to make a motion. We could give direction, but I'm just trying to
Keep going,
move
yeah.
forward.
Might as well vote on it. The vote is to keep going.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Motion is made and seconded to have administration continue to negotiate with the Lummi Nation. Did the mayor negotiate?
I think I would like Gene to clarify that because I believe he was stating.
The mayor and the staff.
Chairman
and
Julius.
oh, yes, Chairman Julius and the mayor and whichever appropriate staff.
Mayor, staff, Chairman Julius, and his staff
There you go. There you go.
negotiate regarding water rights. Is
Not
there
water rights.
regarding
Utility service.
what motion do you guys want? Just state the motion, and then we'll vote on that.
So mine was a question. I already heard the motion. I'm fine with the motion, and there was a second.
Well, I've got head shaking over here.
Oh, okay, I'll wait.
What would the motion be?
You just said water rights. I think we don't mean water rights, we mean water service. That's all.
Water service,
Water
that's fine.
service, great. Okay, further discussion,
Okay,
please.
yeah,
Councilmember
so
Clark.
I'm just, I think there is a point of clarification. So when there was a sense of urgency from the council, it was the understanding that there was a request made from Lummi, and there had been, we hadn't made any decision, it hadn't come to council. I felt like it was over a year while that was going on through staff, and that was where it came to council, in my understanding. So it wasn't this urgent run out and make a solution right now. It was, what we're hearing is, this has been sitting for a while, and it still hadn't been brought to council. Where are we at? What are we doing? And then we gave some direction. My understanding in that, and I was really clear with mine, is that area of annexation was going to be very delicate and sensitive, and I wanted us to approach it that way. I still want us to continue with that. I don't understand what's going to happen differently with that motion than what we've already been, and it keeps coming back to where we're doing business as usual, and that's maybe the issue. I don't know.
I think that if you talk to Amy and I, we started out going out to visit with Tim however many years ago. And the two of us would come and they'd bring some staff, and we actually would exchange ideas. So we're willing to do this, we're willing to do fish restoration thing. That was on the Overwater Walkway too, but that's the kind of discussion we had with them over a long period of time. And that's, I guess, where I wanted to point out that there had been a difference when there was a request and the chairman at that time, Tim Ballou, said, I need for you to tell me in 6 days whether or not you can give me water. And I knew I could not tell him within 6 days if I could give them water or not, because this had been working the way we do it, with us working at the higher level and the staff filling out the details and figuring out what the options were and the things that would actually come to pass in implementing something. So that's where some of this came. But then when the council got involved, I felt it was also more urgent. So I'm very willing, if you want me to deal with the chairman and whoever is also involved in that, then that means potentially I'll bring you updates and I'll give you information. But the difficulty is if we have 8 people negotiating, that would be very difficult. And some of that, I think, would get in the way of actually sitting down with the chairman and doing that. Yeah. I like Jay a lot, and I think he'll do a great job as chair, and so I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm also fine if somebody says, no, I don't think that's a good, somebody else says, I don't think that's a good match. I'm fine with that too. So, and you don't have to vote, you could just point at me. Or her.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Do we want to move the motion, or have we just provided enough input?
I think we provided her direction. It says provide direction, that's what we did.
But yeah, please negotiate. Anything else? Okay, we will close this item, and we will move on to approval of minutes. We have 2 sets of meeting minutes for approval. It's the Lake Whatcom Joint Councils and Commission from March 28th,
Move
and
approval.
the committee meeting minutes from April 9th.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded regarding approving these 2 sets of minutes. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. Older new business, please. Councilmember Hamel.
This morning, we had the Finance Committee meet, and we configured it much like the Planning Committee met. So we were off the dais, working with staff, talking down at the tables there. And this was a scheduling issue. So basically, that worked out really well, but the timing doesn't work very well for Councilmember Vargas. I said that I would bring up under old and new, could we maybe move it to 1 o'clock? And Maria, our legislative aide, said that's going to be basically impossible for her to reconfigure the room back to what it needs to be. So I think I was just thinking about this. The one thing we could do is we could stay on the dais and do it at 1 o'clock, or we can meet down here, but that doesn't accommodate Councilmember Vargas's schedule as well. So I'm trying to get to a yes on this, and I don't know what's going to work.
Well, I personally feel like you can have just as great of a conversation up here. I know it feels more calming down there, like you're doing community, involvement that way at the level, but it's such a configuration challenge.
Yeah, I get it. So that means moving it to 1, and we have several sessions that need to take place. So these will happen in subsequent, maybe not the next meeting, but they will happen in subsequent meetings. So,
Councilmember Vargas.
Could we entertain the thought of after the committee of the whole for those longer discussions? Is that kind of something that we talked about?
Tough, because we have to maintain, first of all, flexibility in the scheduling of all of this, and then that becomes tough because we have executive sessions usually right after this, and then that could be a very late day. Just suggesting that.
Yeah, I personally, I'm just going to say that the struggle is that at the end of the year, we talk about when committees will be happening and the time slots, and finance and justice are in the afternoon, and planning has been in the morning. And so just because I'm trying to give a commitment to my employer, and I set that for the beginning of the year, and I want to be flexible, but I'm also, I work for somebody else, and they pay my mortgage, and city council does not. So,
Minor detail.
minor detail. So I want to be flexible to the council, but I also want to keep my obligations of the terms that I agreed to with my employer in order for me to be here on Mondays. And I do have Monday morning meetings from 8:30 to 10 a.m. every single Monday.
Yeah, and I can't always guarantee that that will always be the time slot because we have so many big issues sometimes that we have to maintain that flexibility, but we will always try to do our best. And it would be a lot easier if it could happen up here for that session, so we don't have to obstruct your time, deconstruct something, construct something. Councilwoman
Yeah,
Hanson.
I still don't mind. I don't think my committee minds having our public works at 9 o'clock in the morning when we can. The problem with having hour-long work sessions at 1 o'clock, you're looking at, you have an hour for finance and an hour for justice, that's 2 hours right off the top. So you're going to have to juggle a lot of other stuff. But
Councilmember Lillquist.
I do see a value in a different layout and tables, and so it would be nice to find a way to achieve it. One way it might be achieved is to have that committee meet in the afternoon, but not in this facility. They can meet in the mayor's boardroom. The difficulty with that, of course, is it won't be recorded and broadcast the same way. So you have to kind of weigh that. Is it more important for there to be a public discussion on camera, or is it more important to have a good table configuration? It's your committee, Dan. Personally, I think being on air in public is going to have to trump what I think is actually a better interaction, which is what you get on the floor in a casual chair arrangement.
Is that enough for you?
I see committee members asking.
Sorry. Councilman Vargas.
I could offer the flexibility that if for any reason I cannot make that schedule, if someone would be willing to step in for me to give the council some flexibility on this, because I realize that that's That's the crux here. So if the days that I cannot accommodate a 10:30 on a Monday, that maybe someone could fill in for me, and I will just have to watch those videos later on in the evening.
11 to 12,
That was my suggestion.
because she's out at 10:30. 11 to 12.
Yeah, well, Councilmember Barker just mentioned we could meet from 11 till noon on those days instead of the 10:30. I don't know if that makes it easier to.
We'll just work at it, because it usually I commit to my employer that I'm available till 12:30.
Oh, sure.
So, but what I'm saying is that if I cannot, and I have a work obligation, if someone could cover for me, I'm willing to be flexible. I'll just watch the meetings later for what I miss.
That works for me. He's always here anyway, so.
We've always been doing our best to try to schedule this with the work arrangement situation. Sometimes it just has to be that way so we can get every single committee in and hopefully get out of here before 7 p.m. Anything further on that?
Oh, no.
Okay, Councilmember Barker, no.
So
new
I
business.
just wanted to bring up, we had an agenda bill item we were set to bring back for committee of the whole that was regarding the Climate Action Task Force. And as soon as that meeting was over, I followed what I thought was council direction in rewriting the current proposal that was on the table, removing the climate action plan. And then I submitted that for the agenda bill. My understanding was it was going to be coming back today, but I know there was some confusion. So for the people that were waiting for that, this will be an agenda item for
Let me
the following
provide some
meeting.
clarity on that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So what I had hoped would happen was that a couple of council members would get together to come up with a draft. What was being proposed was that anywhere between 3 and 5 drafts of that resolution were going to be included in the packet. That is misleading to the community, and that is very confusing. So I still have a hope that a couple of council members will get together to confer and create a draft that we can bring back at a future council meeting, so there won't be any confusion in our packet, or the community won't be misled. So that's why it's not here. Is that fair?
And addressing that, you're right, we did have some confusion because I thought the direction was for us to compare them and to kind of bring the things forward so we could have a discussion to compare them. So you're right, which is why it's not in the packet, because we all thought it was a little bit different. So I will take direction from the council in regards to I think it's important that we discuss the different aspects that were brought up in the 2 different resolutions. So if possible, I think it would be good for us to walk through the changes and the comparisons instead of just a few council members deciding what we should go forward on. So, but I will take council direction on however you wish this to be.
Councilmember Lillquist and Bordeman.
I agree with Pinky. I like that approach, and I own some responsibility. Councilmember Barker did exactly what she was supposed to do, exactly when she was supposed to do it, and the rest of us didn't find the time to follow through. Well, maybe you did. I didn't. It didn't come together. I will own some of that responsibility. I feel badly about that, especially because I'm one of the people who's impatient to get this thing done, so it's, my bad. But nonetheless, I think a good process follows what Pinky is talking about. We have some similar but competing language. We can talk about it, pick the one we prefer. Go ahead.
And I can handle 2, just not 5 drafts, please. Councilmember Bordeman.
I agree with that. I thought that's what was going to happen. I knew April was working on one, and I liked what she was saying, and I knew, as I offered Michael to get together, but he said he's getting together with Pinky, so I stayed out of it. So bring them back. And so then we can have a discussion. We might not like any of them.
Councilmember Vargas.
I was just saying, I'm willing to put them in a sheet that maybe puts it a comparative so that it's easier to, instead of the 2 separate, I think that's kind of what we got. Maybe we could, I could put it in an Excel so that can compare certain points and the other things that we agreed upon. Maybe we don't have to go through all of those things.
Yeah, because another point that I made is we passed the climate action plan. That's the body of work. So I would rather we not get caught up in semantical disagreements about a resolution when we've done the body of work. I do see very important parts of the resolution, though, that I would love for the council to address. Anything else?
Yeah.
Councilmember Bordeman.
Yeah, I just want to, Saturday we had the dedication of the Peace and Reconciliation Arch, and I just want to thank the citizens of Bellingham for their great turnout of this, because it was a big turnout, and The weather cooperated too, but there's so many other things that people could have done, but they showed up for this, and it was a wonderful ceremony. And I think it's something that's very important for the city to memorialize the things that have happened in the past that haven't necessarily been good things that citizens have done in this city to other citizens, and to state that that was the past. We walked through the arch. This is what we accept now. This is our new day, and we are not going to accept those kind of behaviors. And we welcome immigrants, and that's why at the base, in more than a dozen languages, and in the Nooksack language and in the Lummi language, are the words welcome. And I think that's a really important statement that was made, and the citizens came out to support that. So thank you, citizens.
Thank you. And I have one agenda item for older new business. So I had a couple of community members express concerns to me about this, which is why I'm bringing it up. At our ADU public hearing, unfortunately, a couple of council members were shaking their heads and rolling their eyes. And I'm not directing this at anyone, I'm just asking for all of us to agree that we should be open to all feedback that we get from our community, whether we agree or disagree. I recognize we can get caught up in emotions and our own feelings about an issue, but I hope we can remain as open as possible to public comment. And you don't have to agree with anyone, but we do not appear open to our community when we look like we're being defiant, shaking our head, rolling our eyes, throwing our hands up in the air. But this is a message to myself also, for all of us to work together on that.
I will accept that because I was one of them that was shaking my head. But if I get up and go to the bathroom, I should not be subject to bathroom jokes and be told that I have prostate problems.
Right.
That should not happen in this chamber. So I will own what I did. Hopefully that person will own what she did.
Great. Anything further, council? Okay, we will move to executive session, and there are 7 items. That's why I was trying to rush this, guys. Potential property acquisition is the first item. Second item, potential property acquisition. Third item, potential property acquisition. Fourth item, potential property acquisition. Fifth item, potential property acquisition. Sixth item, potential property acquisition. And seventh item is litigation, appeal of planning director's determination to allow a low barrier drop-in shelter at 1013 West Holly Street. I will be back in 45 minutes approximately to adjourn this session.